Welcome to the Edgevana Podcast, where we illuminate subjects in the IT infrastructure space. Get ready to hear some amazing insights from outstanding individuals that will change the way you think about IT. And now, here's your host, Mark Thiele.
So, Keith, welcome to another episode of the Edgevana Podcast.
Well,
I can't believe we took this long to get you on. Really excited.
You know what? You've been on the CTO Advisor podcast, and I think that's what it is. You were like, we see each other often, and we do the Cloud 2030 sometimes, and so it feels like I've been on, but I have not.
No, and this is outstanding, and I'm hoping to, if it's okay with you, to do a little bit of a personal tour of Keith Townsend, the CTO Advisor, and how he got to where he is.
You know what? I don't mind talking about me.
All right. Does your wife mind?
That is you know what? This is turning into a marriage counseling session already, Mark. Wow.
No, that's awesome, man. And for all the audience, Keith is the minor half of the CTO Advisor family. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, sometimes I do interviews for The Cube. I'll host interviews, and me and my wife, she teases me that the most popular Cube video that a Townsend has been on is just a short of her doing the introduction for The Cube for like 30 seconds, got thousands of views, and that's way more than any interview that I've ever done.
Nice. Well, I should get her on to do mine then, because then I'll get more than the 20 people that watch my podcast. So awesome. No, glad to have you, Keith. And I'm really looking forward to learning a little bit more about you. And we talked a month or so ago when we were first talking about doing this podcast. I was interested by, some of the differences, but also some of the similarities in how we, sort of accidentally became who we are in the tech space. And I'd really love to have the audience get a background view of how Keith got to where he is, how he got into IT in the first place, what took him down the path he ended up on, and why he is not just the CTO advisor, but the trusted advisor for CTOs on the Twitterverse and in other places. So with that, Keith, my first question is, tell us a little bit about the very beginning, after the Big Bang. How did Keith get in?
My father would appreciate that one. You know what? Actually, speaking of my father, I'm of an age that everyone of a certain age group in our community kind of remembers the famous movie War Games, at least famous within our community.
Yep.
And everyone kind of wanted to be Matthew Broderick and play with computers. And that was literally my introduction to computers. And my father bought us a little Tandy color computer too. And, I booted it up and I'm like, wait, why is this thing not asking me if I want to play a game type of deal? And I have to learn how to program. Fast forwarded to, science fairs and all kinds of learning how to program. Years later, I ended up cleaning hotel rooms at the Palmer House Hilton for a living. Took a little bit of a detour. Didn't finish school. Had all the potential of the world, but we'll get into kind of the challenges of being raised as Black in America in another podcast. But I didn't take advantage of certain opportunities presented to me, and I didn't get opportunities presented to me. So I ended up cleaning rooms for a living, which is where I met my wife, which is a wonderful detour. But I still had a knack for computers. I think I entered the science fair with a 500-line computer game that was pretty decent. So I still had that base knowledge. I ended up being in the right place at the right time. The mid 90s, everyone was in a rush to get talent for Y2K remediation. If you had a if you had a pulse and you could use a keyboard, you could probably get a job in IT. Got a job in IT working overnight help desk at a commodities futures software vendor, ISV. Worked the third shift, learned how to do IT infrastructure instead of programming, which is probably the worst mistake of my career.
Could have kept from all those cut knuckles and bruised fingers and middle of the night repair jobs if you'd just gone into a simple job like coding. Man, what were you thinking?
Just code. I would, you did not install the server correctly unless you have Band-Aids.
That's right. Exactly. I don't know what they were thinking, but I've never opened a server box that was even as dull as the average piece of paper on the side. I mean, you just get cuts left and right.
The sheet metal from servers was made of some ancient Stone Age torture iron that was meant to harm. It's just
right.
Oh,
right. I think so.
Torture devices.
I think if we look back in time and we find people buried in boxes, they'll be buried in server boxes.
I tend to agree.
Alive.
Yeah.
So you ended up in infrastructure, and a lot of that experience is how I know you, how we know each other, right? I mean,
right.
Both of us, in fact, one of the odd things about our two starting, even though you started with a little bit of a technical background, is that I didn't start with a technical background, but sort of the same way where I literally was working in the lobby doing security. I'd gone back to college because I didn't finish college, and I still didn't finish college. I was working security, and the lady that ran the data center upstairs said, "Mark, you want a job as a computer operator?" And that's how I got into IT. So, and it's been, downhill, uphill, whatever you want to call it ever since then. So, getting into infrastructure at that time, in the next 6, 7, 10 years after you joined was sort of the heyday of infrastructure, right? I mean, it was before we got to the point where it was so programmable, certainly. And there was something of an art and a skill. A Windows server is one of the few things that break Einstein's law of, if you do it more than once, you're insane. In fact, you boot it more than once, you just maybe need to boot it 3 times, and then it'll turn on and work. And you learn that working on Windows machines. So what about that period, right? The period of first of all, what kind of jobs were you doing, and what about that part of the period kind of formed your thinking going forward?
I learned a lot during that time period. One of my first jobs, the help desk job was nice. It was a good way to get my foot in the door. But I'd say one of my first real jobs, I was a network administrator. We call it network administrator, but more specifically, I was a system server administrator. I was a Novell administrator at the Chicago Tribune, back in the heyday of newspapers.
Yep.
When people actually paid for news. It was one of the experiences early on formed my understanding of IT infrastructure from a culture and from a overall. Hold on, guys. I'm gonna hit pause for a sec.
All right.
Yeah, can you? My wife's friend is over.
Oh,
and you guys may not be able to hear them, but I can hear them, and it's throwing me off. So I just asked the husband to.
All right, Doug will catch this and rip it all out for us. No worries.
So one of my first experiences as a network administrator really formed my not just technical knowledge, but my impression on what's really important in IT. I had a CIO come up to me, a group CIO. We were having this horrible trouble with this Novell 5.0 servers when Novell 5.0 first came out. And the CIO was under a lot of stress. She came to me and she said, "Keith, don't let this server go down and don't make any changes." And I'm like, wait, hold on.
Sometimes
think I know what you're saying, but I want to make sure you don't want to make any changes, but you don't want me to let the server go down. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to accomplish that. And the way we accomplished that is that we hired the premier Novell consulting company in the Chicagoland area to come into our data center, take a chair, and babysit the server 24/7. Like literally watch it for it. It's the original monitoring software.
No kidding.
Babysit it 24/7, and if it were to fail, make sure you reboot it in time enough that the connections themselves would time out and users would not know. So obviously, that tells us a lot about the maturity of IT infrastructure at the time, but it also told me a lot about the culture of enterprise IT, specifically around IT infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, that takes me to, and I don't want to leap too far forward in your career, but it sort of takes me to some of the conversations that you and I have been a part of just even in the last year about, cloud migrations or not to cloud or not to cloud, things like that. And it reminds me of 2010, 2011, I was working with a large bank. I won't drag their name through the mud, but I was working for Service Mesh, helping a large bank look at their infrastructure and look at their plans for going to cloud. And they were trying to get my help, and I wasn't expert enough to figure out what to do for them. But they were trying to figure out how to effectively get the equivalent of true stateless for some of their applications. But why they wanted stateless was because these applications were written by people that no longer work there, that no one had a clue for, were running on Windows NT boxes, but were making the bank $200 million a year.
Right.
And they couldn't do anything about it. I mean, they couldn't tear the boxes apart because they couldn't guarantee they could put them back together again. So they had no idea what to do. And so they wanted some magic approach to just lift what the application was and put it into a virtual bubble somewhere else. And we looked at a number of different ways, but nothing removed all of the risk of doing that, at least not at the time.
So, the combining kind of those two thoughts of the thought of the day was that we basically fixed everything with infrastructure. And this is not untrue today. Is maybe less true or less the case, but back then we literally fixed everything with infrastructure. If the application was too slow, we added more CPU, more disk. We got really good at calculating the number of IOPS. If you add more disk, how many IOPS you're going to get, how much faster the Oracle query would run. If the application would fail, we created redundancy inside of the IT infrastructure to fail over to another version move the data over to another node, etc. So a lot of great technologies came out of it, but the practice has gotten us to the point today that, and not to harp too much on the future now, but it's gotten us to the point now that it's really difficult to move a lot of these infrastructures to the public cloud because the applications in public cloud just do not play well together.
Right. And it's, it's funny because I was a guy that I hadn't talked to in years, who's with a new company now, called me and asked to chat today. And we spoke for about a half an hour earlier today. And he was asking about that because he's in a data center company. He's basically been told that absolutely everything's going to be in the cloud. Why are you doing this? It's a waste of time. And so I was trying to tell him to, come down off the cliff, back away from the ledge. Everything's going to be okay. And, when you think about cloud and the opportunity of cloud and how it's had an impact on your career, VMware is cloud-like. VMware, you could argue VMware and the companies that were competing with VMware at the time, whether it was Zen or Hyper-V, helped propagate the idea of cloud more effectively. How has that affected your career path?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So if you kind of get out of that mid 2000s time frame and it's odd to whitewash this a little bit, but it seems like between 2006 to 2010, not much really happened in the IT infrastructure landscape. We were kind of, we're replacing 3-tier networks with 3-tier networks. We're replacing disks with faster disk, servers with faster servers. We're just on this refresh cycle where the data center of 2009 looked a lot like the data center of 2004, 2003, right. Just faster.
Yep.
So, VMware came along and it introduced this level of abstraction that we really never thought about or considered possible in the x86 world. If you're a mainframe guy, you kind of look at it and show, we did that on mainframe for years.
Right.
But there was a correlation and an explosion of my career around 2008, 2009, 2010, where I was an early adopter of VMware ESX. Back then it was called ESX. Mm-hmm. And I had gotten my bachelor's degree at this time and also my master's degree. And Lockheed Martin came knocking at the door. It was also, the fact that we're in a downturn economically encouraged me to take a job on the other coast of on one of the coasts, because I'm in the Midwest. I took a job out east in the DC area with Lockheed Martin.
Yep.
And this is also the onset of the cloud, and customers really wanted something different from their IT infrastructure advisors or teams. It wasn't just this ability to stand up applications, make them resilient, make sure email never failed. Yes, they wanted those things, but they also wanted this agility to go faster.
Right.
How do I, it was a lot of the same things, but it was, how do I eliminate the 6-month procurement cycle that I have for taking servers? The whole VMware abstraction, we'll just buy a year's worth of capacity, and as people need it, we'll spin up VM. So we went from taking 6 to 8 months to provision OS to taking only a month and a half at the most to provision OS. So that really, that reduction of friction between IT infrastructure and business objectives was the start kind of the shift of what I went by then was a virtualized geek to what they know me now as the CTO advisor. That cloud became the shift in my focus on technology.
Right. No, I think that should be true for many of us. Although even up to just 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't that uncommon to talk to people that at least were saying they had no plans. Now that is largely changed for most. And I think for the last holdovers, the pandemic has either decided that they're going to fail or has decided that they're going to proceed and modernize. At least that's what I'm seeing. And how has the pandemic and its side effects affected both how you work and what people are asking for from you?
So let's first talk about the business. I have 2 offerings in my business. CTO advisory, meaning I come in and I advise CTOs, IT infrastructure leaders on their strategy and how to move from a static data center platform or infrastructure to a hybrid infrastructure where they're adopting public cloud as part of their regular IT operations. Right. The other part, and frankly, the bulk of my business is creating content for people who sell to these customers. So the VMwares, Dell, Kubernetes distributions of the world, I create content that kind of shows the way.
Right.
A big part of my business was going to conferences. We saw each other at almost every conference. Yep. And I would, whether it's me appearing on theCUBE, me doing videos in the suite for the CTO advisor, me being in person, touching and talking to customers and clients, that was the bulk of my business. And the pandemic all but killed that model for a bulk of my business. And I think no matter what your business is, if it required some face-to-face interaction, the pandemic had that impact on every last person that I've talked to.
Right. Absolutely. And so, considering that, how have you adapted to enabling customers to take advantage of your history and experience in making the change that they need now without you being able to sit in their offices 24/7 for 2 or 3 weeks at a time?
So I've tried a ton of stuff. Unfortunately, some of the stuff has stuck to the wall. Obviously, Zoom has now become a huge part of what we do. Ironically, in 2020, I invested in a data center.
I remember that. I remember that. I remember going back and forth with those Twitter discussions.
Yeah, like I invested in the data center. So, there's this abstract thing, and I'm sure you talk to people about it, that folks like us can say, yes, there's going to be a combination of private data center, public cloud, the two shall meet, and that will be the standard for most enterprises for the foreseeable future. I'm thinking for the rest of my career that the data center will be a major part of most IT organizations' strategy, and public cloud will grow and become the dominant part of the strategy, but the two shall live together. The thing, especially at the moment when I invested in the data center, was that no one's really showing the work. Like, conceptually, I understand that there's going to be the two things side by side, but what does that look, feel, and taste like? What does it look like? People keep saying it, but I don't see it. And so we built the data center as a exercise in storytelling to be able to show the journey of the journey towards hybrid infrastructure. And I cannot be happier with the results. People have embraced it. From my sponsors to my content viewers, I was blown away the other day. I created some content about hybrid infrastructure, connecting your network and expanding, your VDI presence. And someone who doesn't necessarily follow me on social media engaged in the content. It was an SVP of one of the major sports, engaged with the content, and I'm like, wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's the truth of kind of where we're at from a technology and social perspective as a result of the pandemic and needing to pivot, frankly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's it's ironic that I get and I'd love to hear your take on whether you've seen this or felt it. I occasionally feel like I'm treated almost like a traitor is a harsh word, but someone who's supporting a lost cause when I say some of the things that you just said, right? And it's ironic that my focus, and I again, this is where I'd love to get your feedback. My focus has not been on whether it's cloud or whether it's a private data center, or whether it's both, or whether it's somebody else's crap. My focus has been on what's the best fit for the requirement. And it always has been that.
Right.
Whether it was one old Windows box that was running somebody's database in marketing, or whether it was a fully cloud native app running across multiple zones of Amazon, or Netflix on Cassandra databases all over the world. It's about best fit for the opportunity in question. And so from your perspective, do you see or feel that as much now, more now, less now than maybe a couple years ago?
You know what? I think I probably feel it more now, ironically. And I think it's because I made the decision last year to hard pivot to embrace what I saw in the market. So I think one of the challenges that both me and you have is that we are close to the valley. We're close to the folks doing a lot of the far end things. We're in these working groups that's talking about cloud 2030. We're in these things where people are talking about far futuristic capabilities.
Yep.
But from a day-to-day perspective, when we're talking to folks in the trenches, like customers and we'll call it middle America, but they're across all of America, across all of the globe.
Yep.
When we talk to the folks, they're nowhere near close to that extreme. Even the companies that have, even the large financial institutions that say, you know what, we spent the past 7 years going all cloud. Yeah, that's what they're saying.
Right.
And then there's the reality that there's some Equinix, there's some QTS, there's some data center stuff in there. They may not own a data center anymore, but they have data center stuff.
Yep.
So I absolutely feel the whole, you know what, Keith, no one's really repatriating workloads from the public cloud to the private data center. And I'm like, yeah, they are. So I can pretend that it's not happening, or I can embrace customers where they're at. And I think that authenticity, I think both you've experienced and I've experienced. Analysts kind of like can snub their noses a little bit, but in the reality, customers are where they are.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's obviously suited you well, and I think for the most part, it suited me well. In the end, being true to the customer is what really matters. Now, that doesn't mean I want to give the customer something that they shouldn't own, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been known to tell someone something they don't want to hear because I think it's the wrong thing for them. But I've luckily, except for when I was at VMware, in which case I actually really believed that VMware could solve all the world's problems, because I was at VMware about the same time that you were experiencing your uptake in VMware utilization, et cetera, et cetera. And, but for the most part, I've never been in a position where I had to go sell a customer on a particular piece of hardware or a particular piece of software as being the right option.
Right.
I was always in a position to be able to help them make a decision based on what was the correct and best option, not which technology they must go with, right? And so that I believe that gives us a different perspective. It's like the arguments that people are still having about whether multi-cloud is going to happen. And the same arguments we were having about hybrid cloud 3 years and 4 years and 5 years ago, and whether private cloud would exist. You can continue to, put your head in the sand, or you can look at it and figure out, okay, customers are going to do this. It may not be pretty. I may not like it, but if they're going to do it, how can I help them do it more effectively? Right.
Enter Kubernetes. I'm the folks at IBM Red Hat are not fans of some of my content because I'm not and by extension, VMware Tanzu folks as well. I'm not a huge. It's not that I'm not a fan of Kubernetes. It's just that
you hate it.
Other than the fact that I hate it, it's a hammer, and I need to glue something together. I need glue. It's a hammer, and I need glue.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that, yes, it is a fabulous tool if you have that set of problems. And some of the pushback that I've gotten from that community is, how else are you going to solve problems if you're not going to solve it with Kubernetes? Like, believe it or not, there's some pretty big technical solutions out there that didn't need Kubernetes, and it's done pretty well for themselves.
Yep. No, I agree. So we'll edit this out, Doug.
Not a problem. We'll figure it out.
Sorry, right. I'm reinstalling Mac OS in the background, and it starts with telling me that I can turn on the voice over.
Yeah. No worries. In fact, this so you talked about Kubernetes specifically, and I've felt a little bit of that same pain. In fact, just recently, I've decided to stick my nose in that area a little bit more because not only is Kubernetes supposed to solve everything in massive scale data centers, but now it's supposed to solve everything in little edge distributions in thousands of places as well. And
rage
the crap out of me.
Yeah, that is rage. That is super. It's putting a, I don't even know the right acronym or it's, you can hear it in my voice. I'm frustrated by taking something that wasn't designed to do something at the edge and taking it to the edge.
Yeah.
It's literally like taking the data center design and moving it to the edge. The edge
Right.
doesn't need data center. The edge needs a solution that's right sized for the edge. And
Yep.
Kubernetes isn't it. It's what we have, but just because it's what we have doesn't mean that it's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. So Keith, with that, we'll end on the work talk. This has been an awesome conversation, and I enjoy every time we chat because I learn something new about you, and I appreciate that very much. Always admired the work you do, and love interacting with you on the different media platforms from LinkedIn to Twitter, etc. And I do have to admit that I really miss the opportunity to sit down with a bunch of people over cloud beers or whatever the case may be and have a good conversation about anything and everything, tech or otherwise. So hopefully that will return in the not too distant future. Keith, for the audience, how can they find you, and where can they follow you if they're interested?
So if you like verbose, just random thoughts, you can follow me on the webs at the Twitter's at CTO Advisor. Easiest way to interact with me. DMs are open. And then if you want to see the content, the research, and all of the things that we do, it's thectoadvisor.com is the website. For whatever reason, I can't get whoever owns ctoadvisor.com to sell it. It's just at a generic landing page. But,
Bummer.
People don't like money, I guess.
I guess so. Well, I highly recommend, if you're interested in modern infrastructure and discussions around how infrastructure should be viewed in the modern enterprise, I highly recommend following Keith and just getting to know who Keith is. So Keith, thank you very much for being on the program. I've been looking forward to doing this episode with you, and I hope it's not too long before one of us has the other one on a podcast again. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I too look forward to this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Edgevana Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast listening app or on YouTube. To learn more, visit www.edgevana.com. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us on our next episode.